I am the Ascended Master, Mother Mary, and it is my great joy to welcome you to this New Year's webinar 2026. Let us begin by taking a look at the year that just passed, 2025. 2025, Year of Power. I know that some of you have found it a difficult year, others have found it as most other years. What is the difference? What is it that makes up your experience of a particular year? Well, it is of course always something in your psychology, but specifically for 2025 it will have been something about power, the first ray of power. If there were things you had not quite resolved, then this would make 2025 a difficult year to deal with. Because as we explained at the beginning of last year, it was a year where you saw the expression of power in an unbalanced way. For some of you, many of you in fact, it has not been that you have a tendency to express power in an unbalanced way, but that you have a tendency to look at power being expressed in an unbalanced way and have a reaction to this. Now, I am in no way blaming you for this. It is a normal reaction on a planet like Earth, where you see power being expressed in so many unbalanced ways. However, as we have explained many times before, this is an unnatural planet where there are many imbalances. There are imbalances of all 7 rays. It is not realistic to expect that power should always be expressed in a balanced way on Earth. And as we said at the beginning of last year, it is especially not realistic to expect it in the year 2025, which marks the first year of this 12-year cycle. If you have found this to be a difficult year, if you have found, for example, that you reacted to the unbalanced expressions of power wherever you particularly noticed them, then you can benefit from taking a look at this. What is it you have not accepted in our teachings about an unnatural planet and about the outplaying of free will? You see, as we have expressed many times, the entire purpose of Earth is the growth in consciousness of the beings embodying on this planet. Earth is currently an unnatural planet where most people are in the school of hard knocks. How will people learn to use power in a balanced way? Well, part of it is that they must see certain leaders express power in an unbalanced manner so that they themselves can come to the inner resolution of deciding. We have had enough of this unbalanced use of power. We want a more balanced society. This is essentially the lesson that humankind has been facing since the fallen beings were allowed to embody on Earth because they have, from the moment they came here, used and expressed power in an unbalanced way. The false wisdom created on Earth. We have, of course, explained why that was necessary to turn around the downward spiral that humankind was in because of conformity. We are not talking about a balanced society where everybody agrees, everybody believes the same, everybody accepts the same. We are talking about a balanced society where there is diversity because diversity is not seen as a threat to the peace of mind of the people in the society. You can look at society in various ways, but one of the ways you can look at it is, do the members of that society have peace of mind? And you can go and say the original, or rather not the original, but the societies were found here before the fallen beings came. Many people had a certain peace of mind because nothing really challenged their worldview. They had adopted a certain worldview. Everybody in society pretty much shared it, and therefore, they had a certain peace of mind. But it was not truly an inner peace of mind. Why not? Because they did not have the wisdom of the mother. It was a society, a worldview based on the false wisdom created on Earth. And what do I mean with the false wisdom? I mean the wisdom that looks at conditions as they currently are on Earth and projects based on what you see on Earth, how the universe as an entirety works. Not only the physical universe, but the spiritual universe. This is, as we have said before, when people fell into the duality consciousness, they started creating gods in their own image and after their own likeness. This is the unbalanced human wisdom. Why is it unbalanced? Why is it disconnected from reality? Because what have we explained? You are co-creators. You have co-creative abilities. That means you can project your mental images upon the Mater light, and to some degree the Mater light will conform to those images. It will take on the form of the images in the collective mind of humankind, but that conformity on Earth does not change the reality of how the entire universe works. It is going back to this belief held by many even up through the Middle Ages, that the Earth was the center of the universe. But as you know today from these images from the space telescopes, the universe is incredibly large, and to believe that Earth, this little speck of dust, is the center of the universe is not realistic. But you see, because the Mater light takes on the images projected upon it by humankind, people can look at the matter realm and they can conclude that what they see in the matter realm can tell them something about how the universe works. This is essentially what materialistic science has been trying to do now for centuries. Have they solved all of the questions, all of the enigmas of how the universe works? No, they have not. Why not? Because it can never be done by taking that approach, you see. Co-creating the downward spiral on Earth. What is it that happens here? What happens is simply this. You are a co-creator. You co-create through the mind. You have, as we have explained many times, two options. You can see yourself as connected to something outside your own mind, your higher self, the ascended masters, the Christ mind. Or you can go into separation and duality, where you use the duality consciousness to build a false, unrealistic worldview, seeing yourself as a separate being. When an entire planet, when the majority of the beings on the planet go into separation, they now start projecting images based on the illusions of separation upon the Mater light. The Mater light will to some degree take on these images. For example, by densifying matter so that the lifespan becomes shorter, the body is exposed to disease, making a physical living becomes harder. You have to work at the sweat of your brow instead of picking fruits off the trees, metaphorically speaking. And then, when you are in separation, listen carefully, my beloved, when you are in separation, you forget that you are a co-creator. You simply forget that these conditions that you now see were created by you collectively. Humankind, after they went into separation, forgot that the conditions they saw manifest physically on Earth were co-created by them. And therefore, they now started, after time had passed and generations had passed, they now started looking at conditions on Earth and believing that this was what God had created, and therefore, God had created a limited planet with limited resources, and right there, you have the beginning of suffering on Earth. You are suffering because there are limited resources. But you believe you can do nothing about this because God has mandated that this is how the world is. What do you then do? Well, by projecting this mental image of lack and limitation upon the Mater light, you are intensifying the lack, are you not? You are densifying matter. The more dense the matter, the more difficult it is to work out a physical living. The shorter the lifespan, the more diseases, the more natural disasters, all of these limitations. But you do not see how you can do anything about it, because you think this is how the world is. In these societies we are talking about before the fallen beings came here, they believed that God had created it that way. They were not open to materialism at the time, but materialism is essentially the same. This is how nature is. This is how the laws of nature are. They can be no other way. They certainly have no connection between our minds and the physical conditions we are facing. You see, this is the essence of the conditions you found on Earth before the fallen beings were allowed to embody here. The people on Earth saw no connection between the physical material conditions they were facing and their own minds. This is what creates the downward spiral. The more they see it as inevitable that the world is limited, the more dense matter becomes, because this is the images they are projecting upon the Mater light. The spiral just keeps spiraling downwards. So here comes the fallen beings that we are allowing to embody on Earth, and what do they immediately do? Breaking up conformity. Well, first of all, they challenge the conformity, the conformist mindset. They are coming out with all kinds of conflicting theories about the origin of the Earth and the God they were worshipping at the time. They claimed there were other gods that were stronger than this God, and so forth. But really what the fallen beings did was also, they started hoarding power and resources to themselves. You see, the societies that were there before, they were very egalitarian in the sense that resources were distributed evenly among all people. This, of course, is a society that fallen beings have little patience for because they always want to set themselves up in privileged positions. They quickly started hoarding resources and power to themselves, and therefore, they broke up the conformity, the egalitarian societies, and therefore, slowly slowed down the downward spiral. Now, this was not just the fallen beings who did this, it was also the fact that many avatars embodied to hold a spiritual balance. But my point is, even though the Earth was in a downward spiral, the fallen beings broke it up because they wanted to hoard resources, power, privilege to themselves. They also challenge the worldview that the people had at the time because they always think they know better than anybody else. Various fallen beings attempted to set themselves up as the leaders who could define a worldview. All of a sudden you now had, instead of a planet that had a one worldview, you now had the emergence of different areas, different groupings that had conflicting worldviews. As we have explained with the duality consciousness, of course, the fallen beings used duality. One fallen being takes one dualistic polarity, another fallen being takes another one, and there you have capitalism, communism, this and that, dualistic polarity. This is what started happening there, and the uniform societies were broken up. Longing back to uniformity. Now you see, the misunderstanding that is still hanging over Earth as a black cloud is that uniformity is the only way to solve humankind's problems. You see, there are people on Earth still who have no conscious memory, but a certain longing back to this society that was there before the fallen beings came. Now, as we said, this society would have destroyed the entire planet, but the people, of course, did not acknowledge this. Here you see people who are longing back to this egalitarian uniform society, and they become trapped by fallen beings who are using power in an unbalanced way, and who are using the false wisdom, and so they blindly follow these fallen beings. And what are the fallen beings doing? Well, they are first of all abusing power, seeking to set themselves up as the undisputed leader. Then they are using wisdom in an unbalanced way by saying, I am the only one who knows what is true and false, right and wrong, real and unreal. My worldview is the ultimate worldview. Of course, the fallen being who does this, it is all centered around that being, him or her, in most cases a him, but in some cases also a her, and so now you are again in the mindset. Earth is the center of the universe, or rather, this fallen being is the center of the universe. And the promise made by the fallen being is, if you all follow me, and if you help eradicate those who will not follow me, then we will come back to this Edenic state where we have a uniform egalitarian society, and you are all going to feel that you are on top of the world. You will get rich, you will feel powerful, you will be respected by the world, you will be saving the world. Whatever it may be that they promise. Seeing diversity as a problem. You see that still a large group of the original inhabitants of the Earth are susceptible to this claim that diversity is the problem because diversity is the source of conflict, and therefore, eradicating diversity, making everyone follow the same religion, believe in the same political leader or the same political party, that is the way to overcome all problems. And unfortunately, there are even avatars who are caught up in this mentality, because on a natural planet, you do not have the dualistic conflicts, and that means that if an avatar has not fathomed consciously what duality is, it might also believe that uniformity and conformity is the way to create an ideal society. That is why even avatars can come to believe in this claim of a strong man that can solve all problems. In other words, what I am saying here is this. There is a belief that diversity is the source of conflict held by many among the original inhabitants, but also some avatars. What is the problem with this belief? Well, if you are an ascended master student, you have heard about this concept that we have talked about a few times called the 7 spiritual rays. You have heard that planet Earth was created by the 7 Elohim, each Elohim representing a specific spiritual ray. The 7 spiritual rays are an existential, an essential, a basic diversification. You could not create the Earth or any planet from just one ray. You cannot create a planet from just one spiritual ray. You must use all 7. It cannot be done with one ray, but essentially, this conformist anti-diversification mindset is based on an unwritten assumption that it could be done. Because in order to eradicate diversity, you would have to eradicate the other 6 rays, and just have one ray be left and try to create a planet based on that ray or a society based on that ray. Balancing all 7 rays through one mind. You could attempt to create a society based entirely on the expression of power, a society that was entirely dedicated to wisdom, one that was completely dedicated to love, one that was focused on purity, one that focused on vision, one that focused on peace, one that focused on freedom. But each of these societies would be so unbalanced that they could not be sustained over time even if they could be created, which they could not. And why would you want to create a society based on one spiritual ray when there are seven? Of course, this you cannot see from the duality consciousness. Why can you not see this? Because you do not have a conscious recognition of the one unifying mind, the Christ mind, the Buddha nature. The seven spiritual rays are not different. They are different expressions of the one mind, diversified expressions of the one mind, and when you have a connection to the one mind, you do not see the diversification of the seven rays as differences that create conflict. You see them as complementing each other, and you see that nothing could be created without using them all in a balanced manner. Certainly, there can be times where one ray is stronger, for example, in a particular society or a particular branch of society than the others. But the others must be there to balance, because only that which is balanced can be sustained over time and can grow. You could say that balance is the most important consideration, because only when there is balance can a society be sustained over time, and only when there is balance between the seven rays can it transcend itself and grow in an upward spiral. When there is not balance between the seven rays, the society will enter a downward spiral. Societies were unbalanced before the fallen beings came here. The fallen beings increased that imbalance, but they still broke up the conformity, allowing the avatars and the ascended masters to pull the planet into an upward spiral. It was a very slow process because the downward spiral first had to be stopped, and then very slowly the upward spiral started moving. But it has accelerated over time, especially during the Piscean Age, and it can accelerate even faster in the Aquarian Age. But this can only be achieved through balance, because when you have balance, the balance of the Christ mind, the one mind, the undivided, the indivisible mind, you can look at diversity without seeing it as a threat, but seeing it as a source of creativity and progress. The conformist mindset of the Catholic Church. Look at history. Look at, as we have talked about before, the feudal societies of medieval Europe. Here you have a country, take a small country in Europe, does not matter which one, pick one that had the feudal system. It had a limited amount of land. The primary resource for securing people's survival was agricultural land, where you could grow food. You had a certain amount of land. You had a specific agricultural technology and knowledge that allowed you to grow a certain amount of crops for each unit of land, a very closed system. What could sustain such a society? Well, nothing. It was sustained for a certain amount of time, yes, but you also saw that there was very little progress, very little innovation in these societies. What you eventually saw was that, through the very slow progression of knowledge, more children survived, adults lived longer, some diseases were prevented, and the population grew. And when the population grew beyond a certain level, the land could not produce enough food for all of the people, and that was what broke up the feudal system, because when people are faced with starvation or rebellion against the common order, well, they are more likely to rebel than to simply sit around and starve to death. Here was various upheavals. There was immigration to, first of all, America and so forth. But my point is this: you look at this very stagnant society, and you can see that it was not sustainable over time. But what could change it? Only innovation. Why was there no innovation? Because everybody or most people had this very conformist mindset that was programmed into them by the Catholic Church, holding society in a certain very limited worldview. Why was this? Well, because the Catholic Church was, from its inception, an expression of the first ray of power in a very unbalanced way. It was an attempt to create a society that was conformist. Everybody accepted what the Catholic Church said was doctrine, the worldview. This is how the world was created and how it functioned. And it was inevitable that there were some people that were the leaders and the elite, and most people were the slaves of the elite. Difficult to find in the words of Jesus, but nevertheless, since nobody in Catholic societies could read the words of Jesus themselves, the Catholic Church had a monopoly. Diversity as a source of creativity and progress. My point here is you had created a closed system. It was not sustainable. What could bring society to a more sustainable level? Only diversification. New ideas, new thoughts, a new worldview, new inventions. What brought forth these ideas? Individual human beings who were attuned to the ascended masters and who received one idea here, one idea there, and gradually, very slowly, The Catholic worldview began to be challenged by what is usually called the early scientists, although they would not have seen themselves as materialistic scientists as people see themselves today. They were very much spiritual scientists. You can see that what drives progress is diversity. What drives progress is diversity because diversity comes from the seven rays. What drives diversity? New ideas. Where do new ideas come from? The ascended realm. Listen carefully, my beloved. I am giving you an essential insight. I know many of you have seen it, but I am speaking into the collective consciousness as well, and most people, even most spiritual people on earth, have not grasped this. What did I say earlier? What was the situation on earth before the fallen beings were allowed to come here? They had the false wisdom that comes from observing the conditions in the material universe and using current conditions to make conclusions about where the world came from, how it was created, and how it functions. But you see, the current conditions were co-created by humankind based on the illusion that they are separate beings. Therefore, current conditions on Earth were temporarily allowed to be out of touch with the reality of how the universe works so that free will could outplay itself. A separate, limited world with limited resources. Do you see why this is false wisdom? Humankind is co-creating conditions that are out of touch with the reality of how the universe works. But now they forget this. They look at the conditions they have co-created, and then they make the grand conclusion that this is how the universe actually works. God has really created a limited world with limited resources because the physical realm is not a projection from consciousness. It exists independently of consciousness. This is the essence of the false wisdom. The material realm exists independently of the consciousness of human beings and of the consciousness of beings who are beyond the human level. Perhaps there are not even any beings beyond that level, as if the intelligence you see on Earth would be the highest intelligence in the universe. How then would the universe have been sustainable if all beings in the universe were as intelligent as human beings? How could the universe have been sustained for 13.5 billion years, or whatever the current lifespan is that scientists claim? You see, the fact that the universe exists, that it does function, has functioned for a very long time, should show you there must be an intelligence beyond the human level. The way out of duality. How will we escape the quagmire, the suffering that we are in? 2 ways. First of all, acknowledging the material world is a projection of consciousness. Therefore, the current conditions we see are co-created by humankind. They have been co-created because we have allowed ourselves to have a limited worldview. How do we overcome that worldview? We must get a better worldview, but where is it going to come from? Not from inside our minds, even our collective minds, because if it could be found there, we would already have found it. So if we are to have a higher worldview, we must reach beyond the collective consciousness and our individual minds. And what is beyond? Well, the ascended realm. Why? Because the ascended masters created the earth. The idea that there are no intelligent beings beyond earth can only exist in the mind of separation. The mind of separation can only create problems, suffering, downward spirals, self-destruction. How do you reach beyond it? Well, you must reach to the only thing there is beyond the human level, the ascended masters. Now you can say there are also beings in the emotional, mental, identity realms that you can reach beyond the human level, but that is not really beyond the human level because it is not beyond the level of duality. Beyond one ultimate truth. You see here, the wisdom of the mother has 2 aspects. The physical conditions you see are projection of consciousness, the consciousness of humankind collectively, and everything in the material world is an expression of spiritual energies, 7 spiritual energies. Yes, there are more rays, but we will focus on the 7 here. Therefore, the only way to get out of the quagmire that humankind is in is to reach for ideas from the ascended realm. They will come through the 7 rays and the ascended masters who are working with these 7 rays. Various people are able to tune into one of the 7 rays. Many people are able to tune into one. Fewer people are able to tune into more than one, few people to all 7. But the point is this. If you can tune into one ray, you need to use the wisdom of the mother to realize the fact that there is one spiritual energy beyond the material means there could be more than one. Therefore, you cannot allow yourself to think this is the ultimate truth that I received from this one ray. In fact, You need to overcome this idea that the way to overcome problems, the way to destroy diversity and threats, is to have everybody accept this one truth. Just look at recent history, recorded history, and see how many times this idea that our group has the highest or the only truth has created conflict. You need to be realistic and accept you are able to tune into one spiritual ray, but it is only 1 out of 7, and therefore, the ideas you can receive through the one ray are not the ultimate truth, because even if an ultimate truth could be expressed on Earth, which of course we have explained many times, it cannot be expressed through words. But even if it could, it would have to encompass all 7 rays. Understanding is not everything. What could you do to first of all make it easier for yourself to deal with the difficulties you felt during 2025, but also to set yourself up so you do not have the same or even worse difficulties in 2026? What could you do as a spiritual person? You could look at yourself and see whether you have some subconscious selves based on this illusion that diversity is a threat, and that if only everybody agreed with you, you could overcome all problems on Earth. You could start looking at how you interact with each other as ascended master students in your forums, in your personal interactions. Do you see diversity as a threat? Do you think everybody should agree? Then use our tools to expose these subconscious selves and let them go. Why am I saying this at the beginning of 2026? Because 2026 is dominated by the second ray of wisdom, and the highest wisdom is that wisdom is just one among 7 rays. And even though it is said in the Bible, and even in this rosary you gave, that wisdom is the principal thing, with all thy getting get understanding. Yeah, but the highest understanding is that understanding is not everything. You also need power. You need love. You need purity. You need vision. You need peace. You need freedom. There is a concept floating around out there of a Renaissance man. Why it has to be a man is beyond my comprehension, but nevertheless, a Renaissance person. Well, a Renaissance person would be one who realizes the validity, the importance of all 7 rays, and seeks to embody them in a balanced manifestation. Now again, you can have a person who is stronger on one ray. That is not a problem as long as you recognize the others. You see, the challenge here in this coming year will be, you think you can understand everything. You think that the reason why there are problems on Earth is that you or humanity does not have the highest understanding. What you will see being outplayed in this coming year, there will be many things, but one of the things you will see outplayed is that the intellectuals, the analytical people in all areas of society, will step forward and parade their understanding, and they will all do it with this attitude that, I have the highest, we have the highest understanding, and if only everybody agrees with us, then we can overcome the conflicts we see building on a world scale. It is understanding that is necessary. But understanding must recognize the validity of diversity of the 7 spiritual qualities. Because if you are only using the intellectual, linear, analytical mind, you will not gain understanding. Why? Because what is the analytical mind? It is a comparative mind. That means what? It must have a foundation to compare everything to, and that foundation has traditionally been, and you can see this in almost all belief systems, worldviews, an understanding that people believe is the ultimate understanding. This is the way it is. This we do not need to question, and therefore, we can use the analytical mind to compare everything to this unquestionable truth. But that is exactly what they did in the medieval feudal societies. The unquestionable truth was Catholic doctrine, not even Jesus' teachings, not even the scriptures. Catholic doctrine. That was the unquestionable truth. Everything else had to be compared to this. What did you see during communism? Not even Marxist writings, but the Russian Communist Party's doctrines. That was the unquestionable truth. Everything else had to be compared to that, and if anything contradicted or went beyond, it was rejected. But what did I say was the only thing that could bring a closed society out of the downward spiral? New ideas. Well, a new idea must go beyond the existing worldview, or it is not a new idea. If every new idea is automatically rejected, how is the society ever going to progress? This is what you will see outplayed on a large scale in 2026. These intellectual people will come out. We have the highest understanding. If everybody else accepts this, we can overcome all problems. But you cannot. Even if it was possible to make everybody accept one particular understanding, You will not overcome all problems. No conflict in the diversification. Again, what can you, Ascended Master students, do? Look at this in yourself. Most of you are avatars. Do you still have some belief carried with you from a natural planet that if we can just overcome diversity, we can solve all problems? You see, the fallen beings do not represent diversity. In duality, the duality consciousness, there are conflicts. There can only be conflicts. But what have we explained about duality? There will always be two opposite polarities. Therefore, you can never, ever overcome diversity through the duality consciousness. You cannot either overcome diversity through the Christ consciousness, because the Christ consciousness sees that all the spiritual rays are expressions of the One. The Christ consciousness has no desire to overcome diversity because it sees the need for diversity, that nothing could be created without diversity of the seven rays. But precisely because the Christ consciousness is the one mind and sees all the rays as expressions of the one mind, there is no conflict in the diversification into different rays. This is what you can ponder during this year, and if you can grasp it, embody it, overcome the subconscious selves that will oppose it, you can deal with the initiations of this year. If you do not ponder it, if you do not overcome these subconscious selves, it will be a more difficult year than 2025, partly because the unbalanced expression of power will of course continue in 2026, and it will become worse and worse. But also because if you do not grasp what I am saying here, you will be caught up in this thinking you have to understand what is going on in the world, and why power is being expressed in such unbalanced manner, and you will not be able to understand it, and therefore, you will become more and more frustrated. Now monitor yourself here. When I say diversity is not a problem, can you sense that there are some subconscious selves that are screaming at you? Do not accept this. This is a false teaching. This cannot be true. This cannot be the way it is. There is only one God. But you see, my beloved, yeah, there is only one God, but this one God, this one creator decided to create a world of form. How do you create forms? Well, it must be a diversification. A circle must be different from a square, and so for the creator, diversification is not a problem. Diversification is the source of all creativity, but of course, as we have said, the creator knew it was going to give individual expressions of itself free will. They had the option to go into duality and separation. Therefore, everything is created out of one mind. Without it was not anything made that was made. But again, no world of form without diversification. It is as these modern non-dual teachers who think that only Brahman is real and the world is an illusion, and they think that any diversification is duality. But no, diversification is not duality. Duality is a state of mind that exists only when you go into separation. What you will see in this coming year is that those who are trapped in the dualistic mind will become more and more unbalanced in claiming, we have the only truth, and that only by getting everyone to accept our truth can we solve these serious problems we see on Earth right now. They will also claim that things are getting worse and worse on Earth. There is the threat of a large-scale war. There is the threat of a large-scale economic collapse. There is this and that threat. Oh yes, the environment, global warming, this and that, threats here, threats there, and they will only get worse unless you all accept our truth. But it is precisely this attitude that has created the problems, the conflicts. You see, you can create conflicts in two ways, through unification, conformity, as the inhabitants had done before the fallen beings came, or through the mindset of the fallen beings that always want to be superior. Whether you seek to make everyone the same or make some people superior to others, you will create a downward spiral, reaching beyond the outer mind. An upward spiral is created, not by eradicating diversity, not by elevating one spiritual ray to be the superior one, or one group of people to be the superior people, but by seeing that the Christ is in everything. Without it was not anything or any being made that was made, and therefore, the Christ is in all seven rays. Even if a person can only tune into one spiritual ray, that is still an expression of the Christ, but not the only possible one, not the highest one. You have to, if you want to harmoniously pass through 2026, acknowledge your own individuality and the individuality of others, but you have to overcome this idea that what you can see is the highest truth. This messenger overcame that idea some time ago. If he had not done so, he would not still be a messenger for the ascended masters. You cannot be a messenger unless you can connect to the mind of the ascended masters, the being of the ascended masters. You cannot connect if you think your outer mind has the highest truth, for no matter how sophisticated of a mind or truth or worldview you might have here on Earth, it is, as I have now explained several times, based on the imbalanced conditions currently found on Earth. Therefore, it cannot be the highest wisdom. And if you in your mind think you have the highest understanding, you cannot connect to us. Many of you want to connect to us, and you are, in your minds, you are having this question whether you acknowledge it or not. You are having this question. Why am I not connecting? Because your mind is not open, because you are clinging to an ego-based view that is what we have explained so many times, the ego's insatiable need for security. You see the challenge. Last year brought the release of the first ray of power, an unbalanced use of power. You may have focused on this, you may have been very disturbed by it, this or that expression does not matter. You were disturbed by this, what you saw in this last year. When is this going to end? You are seeking to understand it, but you cannot understand it. It is not a matter of understanding. This is one of the challenges of this coming year. Is to realize you cannot grasp what is going on here on Earth in these years through the outer analytical mind. You must reach beyond that mind, but in order to reach beyond, you must consciously acknowledge you do not understand everything. You do not know everything. You do not have the highest possible view. You must be willing to experience a higher reality than what you can see through the outer mind, and what you will ever be able to see through the outer mind. It is not a matter of coming to a more sophisticated understanding in the outer mind. It is a matter of reaching beyond the outer mind. And some of you are not able to do this, even though you know about ascended masters. Why? Because you are afraid of letting go of the ego's sense that it is in control. How does this messenger receive this dictation from an ascended being? By giving up the desire to be in control. How will you make contact with an ascended being? By giving up your ego's desire to be in control. The challenge of experiencing the ascended master's presence. Some of you have prayed to me, Mother Mary, just show me your being, connect to me. But you see, I cannot connect to you if you have the attitude that you want me to affirm your ego's sense of security. If you experience my being as the messenger is experiencing my being right now, it cannot happen within your ego's worldview. If you experience my presence, it is a complete challenge to your ego's worldview because I am an ascended being and your ego is not and will never be. It is as if you have been living in a dark cave and your eyes are completely used to the darkness, and suddenly you step outside in the bright sun and you look at the sun and your eyes are blinded. Whatever is the belief you have right now that gives your ego its sense of security, its sense of being in control, its sense of knowing how the world works, that is what prevents you from connecting to me, from experiencing my presence directly because my presence would blow that away. Many of you are right there, very, very close to connecting to me, but you cannot let go of that desire to be in control, and therefore, I cannot approach you because it would be too much for you. You have to find a way, and we have given the teachings over and over again, to gradually challenge that sense that you are in control, to come to the point where you can be neutral, open to an experience that is beyond the outer mind. I am an ascended being. I am beyond time and space. I am always with you. I am always ready for you to experience my being, but I will not violate your free will. I will not blow you away with something you cannot handle, and so I will keep speaking through a messenger so you hear the words physically, whereas I could as easily speak to you in your own mind and heart. Not that I would tell you what to do in your life. This is another misunderstanding that keeps many people from connecting to me. This messenger has never asked me to tell him what to do with his life. This may seem contradictory, as he has allowed his entire life to revolve around taking messages from us, but it is not that we have told him as an external force. It is coming from within, and it can for you as well, so you can discover, as it is said in this invocation, the specifics of your divine plan, not all at once, but little by little. It has been my great joy to share my presence with you. Many more things can of course be said about this coming year. Many things will be said by other masters, but the most important thing to watch out for is not the outer events. Is there going to be a war, more wars, fewer wars? Is there going to be an economic collapse or an economic downturn? This or that? These are just circumstantial. I know that if you are directly affected by it, like people in Ukraine and Russia are affected by the war there, it may not seem that way, and I understand this. But on a world scale, what will really define this coming year is how people use the false wisdom to claim that this is the only way to overcome the threats. They will magnify the threats and make them seem as threatening as possible. They will make it seem like there is only one solution, it is ours. Or they will make it seem like there is no solution. But there is always a solution, and it is to reach for the Christ mind and a balanced expression of all 7 rays. With this, I seal you in the joy of my heart, and I hope you will consider how to step beyond that outer mind, so you can experience my presence directly within your own being, for there I am, as much as I am everywhere else. For I am the divine mother for earth. How could I not be everywhere? How could there be any place on earth where the divine mother is not? For everything is made out of the mater light. Without him, the Christ mind, was not anything made that was made. But without her, the divine mother, was not anything made that was made, and the divine mother I am.